At this time, I'm going to ask Secretary Mary Dodoni to have a formal roll call. Mary? Are you unmuted, Mary?
I apologize. I see on the call Acting Chairwoman Georgia Noon-Sherrod. I am on the call.
Ask each person specifically so that we can make sure that we can hear them so they can answer present.
Okay, great. Then, folks, you're going to have to unmute yourself. And if you will give me just a moment, I'm going to go to my official list of official names. I apologize, I did not have this up before.
Mary, if you like,
Georgia Noon-Sherrod, you are here, correct?
Present.
Yes, Ms. Mohan Grover.
Thank you.
Present.
Tony Pratt. Tosin.
Present.
Thank you very much. Dr. Khalid Saeed. Faye Gaskins.
Present.
Thank you, Faye. John Watts, Pastor John Watts.
Present.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mark Apter.
I am here.
Thank you, Mark. And I believe that completes the roll call. Also recognize that the Human Relations Officer, for our purposes, Ms. Alana Dennis, is with us, and Jennifer herself from the County Executive's Office is with us at the start of the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd also like to recognize Lori Blair, who's joined the call. Lori, thank you. And Greg is on the call as well. Wayne?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. So we're going to look very briefly at the minutes. We have a number of minutes that need to be approved. And so if by common consent, if I can ask that the agenda, if we can slightly change this agenda just a little bit, because a number of the minutes is going to, I think, mess a little bit with our time. And so our training is very important. We've been waiting for a very long time to get this particular type of training. So if by common consent, I can have adoption of the minutes, but with a slight alteration.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. And by common consent is, can we do that as a committee? As commission?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
There are no objections.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Are there any objections? Excuse me? Are there any objections? Okay, hearing none, we will adjust the agenda to move the minutes after Greg's presentation. So at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over, the training, to Alana. Alana, if you would introduce our guests for us and kind of set the tone, and if everyone else would again mute your microphones, that way we can be fully engaged and hear without interruption.
Yes, it's just going to be a very quick introduction. I am Alana Dennis. I am the county's EEO director, and in the capacity as relates to the Human Relations Commission, I'm serving as the appointed Human Relations Officer. We are so grateful and appreciative of having both the County Attorney Gregory Swain and the Assistant County Attorney Lori Blair in attendance at today's meeting. And to really provide to us information, training, Q&A questions for the commissioners to feel free and ask questions if they so have to our guest speakers with regards to the fair housing laws, the recent laws as relates to the Human Relations Commission's role, purview of responsibilities, and also, of course, open meetings. So with no further delay, I do not know whether I will give them the option to choose. I believe it was Greg that may start first, and you're on mute, Greg.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Swain. I'm the county attorney. Thank you for inviting us to your meeting. Lori Blair Klossmeyer is my deputy county attorney, and both of us put a lot of time and effort into drafting the legislation that you all are implementing. So it's nice to meet you all. I'd like to just brush on two things before we get started, really. And both of these items are state law provisions that apply to your activities. One of them is the Open Meetings Act, and I will let Laurie walk you through sort of an outline overview of the Open Meetings Act. The other is the Maryland Public Information Act. And both of these laws are what they call sunshine laws. They both are geared towards providing visibility and openness in the operation of county government. So the Maryland Public Information Act is very similar to the Federal Freedom of Information Act. It's an act, a state law that allows any citizen to request certain information pertaining to the operation of public bodies, and such as the Human Relations Commission, and really all areas of county government. The most important thing I can tell you about the Maryland Public Information Act is if you get a request that is directed to any of you, you should be sending it to my office, okay? There are a number of exceptions and protections built into the Maryland Public Information Act such that certain things should not be disclosed. And when we get these requests, we typically work with department heads and boards and commissions to review the request, determine the legality of the request and what information they're looking for, whether that information is disclosable or whether it is protected, or whether it's in the gray area in between, because there is a gray area in between. So we analyze all of those requests, and then we implement a search for that information, because a lot of times what people are looking for are emails, and we have score that can allow us to target emails pretty quickly based on the topic that they're looking for. Most of what you do is subject to public disclosure, particularly emails. That can also include text and things like that. So be aware when you are drafting emails and sending emails that you should consider whether you want this read to you by a TV reporter or whether you want to read this in the newspaper as you heard these things, because they are subject to disclosure. We always like to help with these types of things, so I'm encouraging the commission to include us if you get those requests. Sometimes the requests go right to the county executive's office, but we get involved in those as well. So if you have a particular question, you can always reach out to me. We have an attorney in our office named Kemp Hammond, and he does all the Public Information Act requests. So he is our resident expert on this, and all these requests go through him. And we are available to answer any of your questions. With regard to the Open Meetings Act, just very generally, the Open Meetings Act requires public bodies such as the Human Relations Commission to have their meetings open. This is a very hot topic in light of the coronavirus. So what the Open Meetings Act contemplates, and it's somewhat antiquated, and a lot of our laws did not anticipate, the COVID-19 pandemic, so it's not a close fit. But what the Open Meetings Act contemplates is that meetings be held at a location that is reasonably accessible to the public, which has been a problem because it's the location element that has been the problem. So we spend much time analyzing many opinions of the Open Meetings Act Compliance Board, court opinions, et cetera, in preparing the advice that we eventually distributed on this that would allow these types of meetings to be held virtually and still meet the Open Meetings Act requirements as far as accessibility goes. You'll see that with our county council. You'll see it with many of our boards and commissions. You'll see it with county councils, and virtually every jurisdiction in Maryland have gone to virtual meetings. All of that with the acknowledgement that the act really requires a location, but you know, we've all become comfortable with the fact that conducting county business requires these types of meetings and to drag everybody into a room for a meeting. So we've all reached a comfort level with that, and I don't anticipate there's going to be any issue with this once this emergency has been lifted. So a lot of discussion on Open Meetings Act in the Office of Law, and I know in the County Executive Suite as well. So let me turn it over to Lori, and she'll walk you through her outline. She is, again, probably our resident expert on the Open Meetings Act. She's very familiar with it and has been dealing with it for years. So I will turn it over to you, Lori.
Thank you, and greetings from my sun porch temporary office. So I'm going to hit share screen. This is something new and exciting for me, so hopefully it will work. Well, it's disabled. In any event, I believe that Alana transmitted to you 2 documents that I sent to her at 1:30 in the morning. And Alana, it really wasn't necessary for you to answer at 1:45 in the morning, but it's nice to know somebody else was awake. So these documents, I don't claim any pride of, these are not my documents. These are documents that are found on the Attorney General's website. That website has some good information on both the Public Information Act and the Open Meetings Act under Open Government. If you kind of scroll down their page, you'll see something that says Open Government. If you click on that, it takes you to all of the resources for the Public Information Act and Open Meetings. The one document is the Open Meetings FAQs, which is the quick guide. They also have a much longer manual that has a lot of legalese in it. It's something we do as attorneys look at. I wouldn't really expect lay people to get a whole lot more out of it than is you need from this quick the FAQs. But we certainly are open. Anytime you have a question, don't try to fumble through all of that. Just give us a call and we'll be happy to answer. So basically the act applies to a public body having a meeting of a quorum of its members. So there's no question that the Human Relations Commission is a public body subject to the act. Quorum means if you would have under your under the law, the county code, a quorum is a majority of the voting members. You have 7 voting members. So if at least 4 voting members have a meeting, that would be a quorum. Then the question becomes, what is a meeting? And that is basically if you are conducting, transacting public business. So if 4 of you happen to be at the same banquet, because it's a topic that all of you, that at least 4 of you are involved in, and you just happen to say hello to each other, that is not a meeting, that is not conducting public business. However, if you would be at that same banquet and you start discussing a complaint that is in front of you at that time, that even though it's at a banquet, it's your normal meeting spot or your normal Zoom meeting spot, that still could be considered a meeting. And so that should not happen. But that's, so basically a meeting is anytime you have a quorum discussing public business. So then the question, so now I've kind of run through the first 2 pages because I think the more important things are on the next pages. So page 3 talks about the functions of the body that are subject to the Open Meetings Act. The Human Relations Commission has a couple of functions. It's got a lot of things that it does that are advisory, looking at fair housing issues, to give advice to the county executive, the county council. And it also has what we call quasi-judicial functions, which are when you have complaints in front of quasi-judicial functions are not subject to the act. However, the Human Commission's law in our code specifically says that those proceedings will be conducted in an open meeting. So anything you do is going to have to be in an open meeting, whether you're doing the advisory or you're doing the quasi-judicial. So then the question becomes, what's required if you have to have an open meeting? Well, you have to give reasonable advance notice of the meeting. There's no hard and fast rule of what that is, but it generally has to be some meaningful amount of time that a person could, if they wanted to have access to your meeting, have time to get that access to your meeting. It's going to be fact dependent, obviously. If it's an emergency situation, it's going to be different than if it's just a generally regularly scheduled meeting. Giving that notice, websites where such notice would normally be found, such as the county website, is an appropriate avenue for giving notice. If there are other places that people would look for these types of meetings, they can be used as well. But I think generally anytime it's on the county website, that should be sufficient. You have to make an agenda available in advance. So that doesn't mean that your agenda won't change, but a proposed agenda, and if there are changes that occur sometime between when you advertise the agenda and the meeting itself, and if it's enough time that you can put a revised agenda out there, that is a good thing, but it's not necessarily required if it would be kind of a last minute change for some reason. You have to hold the meetings openly. As Greg said, that means having some accessible location. In non-COVID times, an accessible location, at least an accessible, something like what we're doing now, the Zoom type meeting that the public can either view or call in. You could even do a meeting only by telephone, as long as everybody can hear each other and the public can hear everybody. That would also be permitted. It does not have to be a video conference. You have to adopt minutes, and you have to retain the minutes for 5 years. And there is a little more discussion about the reasonable advance notice, and what it means to meet openly in this frequently asked questions document. There's also, on the second document, there's a compliance checklist, and the first page of that is the compliance checklist, and the first 4 things are the kind of the things that I just talked about the notice, the agenda, the public attendance, and the minutes. And then the next part of this discussion is where it gets a little more complicated, which is closing a meeting. Under the state law, there are 15 grounds upon which to close an open meeting. Basically, what has to occur, however, is that you have to have an open meeting to agree to close the meeting. I've looked through this list of 15, and I don't think that, and that is actually, I'm sorry, the list of 15 is the second page of the compliance checklist handout. I only see maybe 3 that would ever come into play with this commission. And that would be number 2, to protect the privacy or reputation of an individual with respect to a matter but it has to be a matter not related to public business. So it would have to be somehow not related to a complaint that you're hearing, which would be public business, or your advisory function. Number 7 is to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice. So if there was some issue that you wanted to discuss with the Office of Law and get advice on related to a complaint or procedure or something, or the rules or something of that nature, you could close the meeting for that purpose. And the other one would be to consult with staff, consultants, or other individuals about pending or potential litigation. My guess is this is more related to litigation where somebody didn't like the commission's decision and wanted to take some action, and you wanted to discuss what had occurred and how to deal with the litigation. You'd probably also be obtaining legal advice, so that might overlap a little bit. But of the 15, I really think that those are the three. And you can see from the first page, the compliance checklist. There are a number of steps that you have to go through to close the meeting. My recommendation is if you ever in that situation where you think you want to close a meeting or you're going to want to close a meeting, that you contact our office and we can discuss first whether it is one of the things for which you could close a meeting, and second, what exactly should be done. We could actually do a script of what should be done to close the meeting. My guess is it's going to be a very unusual situation of if a meeting would be closed. Going back to the frequently asked questions guideline, it does talk about minutes and inspection of minutes. That's where Greg was talking about the Public Information Act. I believe the minutes will be posted on the website. I think for a lot of boards and commissions, they are available that way. So you may not get direct requests. It may just be that the public can access them on the website. Each public body must have a member who attends the online training for open meetings. I don't know if that has happened yet, but it's recommended that one of the voting members participate in that training. It doesn't take very long. And it kind of goes through some of the things that we've just talked about. Thing I do want to talk about just briefly on open meetings, and this goes back to the quorum requirement. Public bodies can have committees or subcommittees, and those subcommittees are generally, if they are appointed, for example, if your chair should appoint a subcommittee on a particular topic, that subcommittee would not be a public body subject to the Open Meetings Act. With one caveat, which is you're a small body, you only have 7 voting members. If that committee has a quorum of the committee as a whole, in other words, 4 or more of you are on that committee, then that committee does become the public body of the Human Relations Commission, and that meeting then would be subject to the Open Meetings Act. So my suggestion is if you're going to have a committee, that they may be 3 or less, or if you want a bigger committee, you can have a bigger committee, but just remember that it's going to be, all of its meetings are going to be subject to the Open Meetings Act in the same way that the commission's meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act. Violations of the Act, members of the public can make complaints to something called the Open Meetings Compliance Board, which is a state administrative board. That board doesn't have a whole lot of power. It basically, you have to kind of stand up and say, we made a mistake and we did it wrong, if they find that you did. But there's also judicial, there's also a cause of action to go directly to court to bring an action, and it basically invalidates anything that happened at a meeting that was supposed to be open and was not. The reason that's important to this commission is more because on its quasi-judicial side, if you are adjudicating complaints, you don't want your decisions wiped out because you didn't comply with the Open Meetings Act. Your advisory functions are a little different. They aren't making things happen, so they're just advisory, making recommendations. So that's a little less of a risk, but it's still something to be aware of, that it is possible that could happen. So I know I ran through this very quickly, and I know these we've got a bunch of pages here that I sent out, but again, it's much easier if you have any questions. I'll certainly answer anything now, but if something comes up in the future, you're not sure about something, feel free to contact me. I will keep an eye on the schedule. I don't know if you normally meet at 4 o'clock. I think you might meet normally later in the evening, whatever works for you. But I can be available at any time for email or phone call for a question if something comes up during one of your meetings. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now. Otherwise, feel free to email or call. I believe has my contact information. So.
Well, Thank you, Lori. Really appreciate it. If we have any questions, we can ask a handful now. I don't want to get too far off the agenda, but who has a question? If you can wave, you actually have the ability under reactions to wave, and I'll recognize you from there.
I'll wave it.
Okay. Faye, do you have a question?
I did. I was looking for the wave.
That's okay. Go ahead and ask your question.
So if we want to advance the part of the meeting may be closed and it meets the criteria, but not the entire meeting. So for part of the meeting, we may want to go to executive session, I guess, the closed part of it. Do we update on the agenda that this part of the meeting will be closed so that the public is already aware, or at what point do we make that known to the public?
Yes, if you know that you are going to discuss something or have some topic that you are going to want to close part of the meeting, that should be included on the agenda if you know in advance. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Okay. Don't see anyone waving at this time. If I missed you, just go ahead and speak out. Okay. So Lori, just so you know, I think 2 or 3 of us have actually gone through and taken advantage of the online Open Meetings Act training. So that was something that as a commission we did relatively early, and we're encouraging everyone, if at all possible, to do that. It's relatively easy, it's online. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation back over to Greg.
Okay. One of the things that's fairly unique about your commission is you have, under the code, you have the right to hold hearings on complaints. So there's a couple other boards or commissions in the county that have that same authority. Animal Control Commission and our towing license board. What we do with your type of commissions is we typically, if you're having a hearing, we will provide an attorney to be at the hearing to provide advice during the course of the hearing. And that advice can be on things like the admissibility of evidence and interpretation of code provisions, etc. So I don't anticipate that you, well, we wouldn't provide an attorney for every meeting you have, but if you do have a hearing, we will provide an attorney to you to give advice before the hearing, after the hearing, and actually during the hearing as well. One of the reasons that you can go into closed session during a meeting or during a hearing is to get advice of your attorney. So with the Board of Appeals, for instance, they typically will go off record, consult with their attorney, and there's a closed statement you would read on the record, and then go back into the open meeting once they've received their advice. So we would anticipate the same thing for you. You would just need to let us know when you get a complaint and when the hearing would be scheduled.
Okay. So let me just ask that question just for clarification. Let's say we're having a hearing. We make the request to your office ahead of time. We need counsel in this. We may or may not need them, so they're there for us. But we posted the public notice about the event and something comes up, okay? So according to the rules of the Open Meeting Act, if we want to call for closed session at some point, we need to list that in the agenda. But if something comes up that's not there, are we allowed to then do that as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, okay, fantastic. And then of course that would just need to be noted in the minutes. Now, is a person able to then request information of what occurred as long as it wasn't private? They can't receive that information, right?
Yeah, the reason you would be closing the meeting would be to get legal advice, and that legal advice is protected against disclosure. So,
okay.
And I think that's one of the fairly rare exceptions. I mean, if you know you're going into a closed session, so, and let me give an example. I am on our self-insured fund committee, and we can, every month we meet and we consider payouts from the county's self-insurance fund, we always know there's going to be a closed session in every one of those meetings. So we actually have an agenda for that closed session, always published in advance. But with the Board of Appeals, they have an agenda that they would post, but they don't know when a legal question is going to come up. So in that case, there's a prepared statement that they read to explaining why they're going into closed session, that they put on the record, they get their advice, they come back and they move on.
Now you can help us with preparing and crafting that statement, correct?
Absolutely. I'm sure we have one. We've crafted already, yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because it seems rather complicated in the reading of the rule, what the language needs to look like. So it's comforting to know that we don't necessarily have to do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's even one on the Attorney General's website that we would help you modify to your purposes.
Fantastic, fantastic. So does anyone else have any questions about the Open Meeting Act or the Maryland Public Information Act? Any commissioner? Okay. So we've gone over what the law is and what it covers. So how, Greg, if you can get into subpoenas, when we talked really briefly about hearings, can you tell us a little bit more about subpoenas and how that might be affected by the law?
So I would expect that with your group, because it's a new commission, that when you get the first case, you're going to have a lot of questions. And probably every case is a little different, but there'll be a lot of the same questions. So we anticipate working with you when complaints come in until you're more comfortable with dealing with it. But a lot of times in these cases, what you're going to have is you're going to have the complainant and you're going to have the respondent. Okay, and if you review a complaint and you see that there's merit, there's actually going to be a hearing, there may be other parties that you don't anticipate either the complainant or the respondent would bring into the case that you might want to come testify. Okay, so based on that, you have the right to issue subpoenas under the county code. That's something that we would assist you with. We would assist you with drafting the subpoena, how to serve it, how to word it, what information you're looking for, etc. And I think, when the first case comes in, we'll have a chance to work through a lot of those types of processes as well as those types of documents. But the basic premise of a subpoena, it's an order from a court or a quasi-judicial body to appear and either produce records or give testimony. So that's something that we would assist you with. You can subpoena anyone. Some things are going to be protected against disclosure by various legal privileges, and that's something, of course, we can advise you on. So with regard to subpoenas, I guess the answer to your question would be, you should know that you can subpoena most people to come and give testimony. Once you've made that decision, you should consult with us and we will work with you on the mechanics of doing so, getting the subpoena prepared, getting it served, etc.
Okay, so we have a question. Let's see here, Mary Didoni, go ahead.
Two questions. Going back to what constitutes quorum, I believe that there are 7 members of this body that are representing districts and 4 that are appointed at large. Therefore, I believe our total number is 11 and our quorum would be 6 rather than 4. Is that correct?
11, yes.
I'm sorry. It's 11 voting members. You're right.
Right. Yes.
I was saying 7. So yeah, it would be 6.
Thank you very much for the clarification. And from the discussion, it appears to me that the hearings themselves are open meetings. Is that also correct understanding?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. That was all.
So under that scenario, as I said, you would have some people likely who are just willing to cooperate and willing to share, and some people who might not be willing. That's the purpose of a subpoena, is to compel testimony when someone does not want to volunteer it. So usually with this kind of a commission, I think the first goal of the commission would be to reach out to folks who are not parties to the case and see if they want to appear or provide written statements, whatever it might be. If not, and if their testimony is deemed to be critical, if you think it's really important that they come, then a subpoena should be issued and should be served. And as I said, we would um, assist the commission with the preparation and service of that subpoena.
Okay, so you will assist the commission with the preparation of the subpoena, any legal advice, and then of course, at the actual hearing, if there's any legal maneuvering or need to have legal advice, you're there for us to basically serve as our counsel.
Right. We will have somebody sitting with you, and they'll be available to provide immediate assistance and questions as you need them.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about that? I don't see any.
And hi, I'm so sorry. I don't know where the hand is right now. Oh, I see. Let me raise my hand. Raise hand.
Alana, yes, you have a question?
It was not about that, Greg. I just wanted to make sure I heard it correctly when Mary was asking about the quorum. And normally the commission would have 11, but we're one shy down. So that's where I think she was suggesting the 6 now being the quorum. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I heard it correctly.
Well, I think if you have 10 members, it would be 6. If you have 11 members, it would still be 6.
Right. It would still be what? I'm so sorry.
It would still be 6. So
Okay.
you have 11 positions, but the quorum is going to be based on the actual number of members. So if you have a vacant position, that would not count.
I got you. I just wanted to be clear on that because I thought that's where she may have been asking. Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
So, Greg, really the final question, which is one that I think a lot of us have, is what protections do individual commissioners have against legal action? So now that we have the power as a body to have these hearings, do investigations and so forth, let's say that someone thinks that we've made a mistake or that we were malice or, maybe. What legal protections do we have against someone filing a lawsuit against us, against, not accurately posting a meeting, in accordance with the Open Meeting Act? Can you talk a little bit about both of those scenarios?
Right. Well, because you are appointed to the Human Relations Commission and you are performing a governmental function, and because you're performing a governmental function, you have governmental immunity. Governmental immunity covers different areas, but generally the test to determine whether the actions of the government are protected by governmental immunity is whether the entity is performing a governmental function or a proprietary function. A governmental function is doing the type of things that you all do. A proprietary function is something like, I guess, if the county is holding some event and they're selling tickets to it, it's more of a private type of function that is not traditionally a governmental function. So for the most part, and I think there may even be a separate immunity that applies to you, but generally governmental immunity would protect you. Now, that does not mean that someone couldn't sue you, but what it does mean is that the initial defense that the Office of Law would raise, and we would defend you, would be governmental immunity. And that's usually the end of the case, especially for the functions that you all serve in this case. So that is the answer. There is a broad immunity for governmental functions, and that would apply to the Human Relations Commission.
That gives us some comfort. Okay. John, did you have a question? I noticed you came off mute. Did you, Pastor John Watts? No? Okay. Does anyone else have a question? Comments? See, I'm going over everyone. Okay, let me get right back to our agenda and then make sure that I've covered everything here. So thus far, we've covered what the law is for both Open Meetings Act as well as the Maryland Public Information Act. Both are sunshine laws, if I'm not mistaken, is what you call them, Greg.
Yep.
We've also covered what the law covers itself. What does it mean? and the role of the HRC as it relates to subpoenas, hearings, and what individual coverage we have against legal action. So I think that's pretty broad. Are you sure there are no questions? Okay, hearing none. We want to thank you both, Lori and Greg, for joining us for this meeting. I'm sure we will have additional questions, and we promise to reach out as it relates to when and if we are posting. I know that Mark, in particular, who's chair of our communications committee, had questions early on about how these virtual meetings were related to the Open Meetings Act. And so we appreciate that question, and we appreciate Lana for reaching out to you to help us kind of clarify what that means. So, Mark, are you sure you don't have any questions of Greg and Lori while they're on the line with us?
I don't think I do. I mean, I think their position is their position still that we have to have somebody at this public site, even if we're having a Zoom meeting?
No. No, well, I would, you all have not received any complaints yet, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm hopeful that by the time you do and the time it gets to your next meeting, we won't be meeting virtually. But we have issued several legal opinions on the Open Meetings Act and the accessibility nature of it. And we have concluded that doing it in this fashion, making it publicly accessible on the internet and TV and things like that, meets the accessibility requirements of the Open Meetings Act. So you do not need to provide an actual location for people to go to and watch the meeting or hear the meeting. We're doing it electronically and virtually, and we've deemed that to be okay.
Okay. So just to clarify, as long as we publish on our agenda and on the website access to that meeting, that should satisfy that criteria for public notice. Is that correct?
Right. You know, if you want to take a look at the county council website and see how they've done it, they've put a notice on as to how they're meeting, you know, and where you can go to watch the meeting and how you can participate. So that's helpful to put on your agenda, put it on the website.
Okay. I'm sorry, we had a question. So the agenda says Fair Housing Act. Greg, did we talk with you at all about the Fair Housing Act? Talking with us about that this evening?
Well, I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I apologize because thank you, Faye, for reminding us of that, because I'm going back and forth between the agenda because I can't share the screen the way that I want to. But absolutely, because I was looking at this as, wow, we have a lot of extra time. But that's because the agenda specifically states that Greg would discuss the Fair Housing Act with us. So that's the second item on the agenda for training. So if you wouldn't mind going into that, really appreciate it.
Well, you know, the Fair Housing Act guarantees that all folks have the right to equal treatment under federal law. So what the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of certain criteria in federal law. We've expanded it at the local level because we are including some things in our local law that the federal law does not include. You know, the normal gender, sexual orientation, I think, is in discrimination in
Accommodations.
what was it?
Public accommodations.
Public accommodations, right. But that didn't go forward at this time. I think the decision was made, let's move forward with housing, and then we can expand that later down the road. And if that happens, then those duties to enforce those laws would also fall upon the Human Relations Commission. Right now it is housing.
All right, I spoke to the county executive about this some months ago, and his position was that it should be broader, and it was kind of a mistake in the drafting that limited us to housing and he was going to have it changed. Do you know anything about that?
As I said, I know when we originally drafted it, it was encompassing those other areas. So um, I will say this, most of the conversations I've had with him lately have been COVID-19 conversations. So we have not brought that issue up, but I will, next time I speak to him, I will mention that. And I'll talk with his legislative director as well about that issue. I know because of the coronavirus problems, we do have a backlog of legislation that's come up. So it's not something that we have forgotten about, and we'd be able to move on it pretty quickly because we already drafted most of it. But I have not been given any direction to proceed with that. So I'll certainly pass that concern along.
I will say that as far as the advisory function goes, I think it is broader than housing. I mean, I think there could be other discrimination dealt with there, but the complaint definitely is limited to housing.
The complaint, right.
That seems to be consistent and correct with what we've been told. Alana, you had a question?
Yes. Hi, Greg. I think they need, and I'm just saying from a human relations officer perspective, that the commissioners may need some clarification with regards to the Fair Housing 5519 as relates to the scope of concerns. I know you gave a general overview, and we appreciate that very much, but there's a confusion that I've received as far as from the community. Actually, when they call up, they may say, "Oh, my landlord is not correcting issues or concerns regarding the mold or mice or things of that nature." So I wanted to make sure, as far as landlord-tenant disputes, if you would just clarify that for the commissioners here so that they know the distinction with regards to this fair housing legislation. Right. I just don't want to make assumptions that we're all on the same, page.
Right.
Because I know that members of the community are.
Well, the commission does not have any authority to address landlord-tenant issues. All of that is handled by state court, right? So if you're talking about things like rents not being paid or the landlord isn't fixing my faucet, or those types of things, they really are state law issues. The exception would be is if someone's alleging, well, the landlord's not doing repairs to my bathroom because I happen to be a lawyer and everybody else gets it, but for some reason he hates lawyers and he's not fixing it. That would be something we would want to take a look at. What it really comes down to is when someone is alleging that the landlord or someone else is treating them differently in something relating to housing because of their inclusion in a particular class that's protected, and you can see what the classes are, that's something for the commission to consider. And of course, if there's a complaint and there's ever any question as to whether the commission has jurisdiction to address the complaint, we are happy to review it and weigh in.
And so,
wait, I'm sorry. I apologize. I had a follow up to that.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I accidentally did not,
didn't raise your hand.
Right. So, okay. Yes. And actually, that's definitely, I would encourage the commissioners, or rather Georgia, as the head of the commission, or to reach out to the Office of Law. They've been very, very helpful, and all the time, whenever I have an issue, I always reach out, for their input. So, and typically, just to be clarification of that, with the cases or the inquiries, I call them inquiries, that have been made, brought to my attention, it's typically people who are expressing just what you're saying, that we are tenant association, or me and several other people, when I give the kind of a little bit of the general information, there's no distinction between protected classification. So I think that's really important. The other thing I wanted to just, could you tap on source of income as well? Could you just explain a little bit of that?
Right, sure. Well, yeah, well, the purpose of including source of income as a protected class is the reluctance of some landlords, particularly, to offer sites to folks who are receiving government assistance. And then the reason for that is there are protections built into those types of leases where the landlord doesn't have the normal freedom to evict a tenant simply because they didn't pay the rent. So landlords are reluctant some landlords are reluctant to accept that type of a tenant based solely on their source of income. So we included that protection. It's pretty controversial. If you recall last year in Baltimore City, they were advocating a similar provision, and the end result was they watered it down. So it did not provide that type of protection except in some sort of a limited way. So we felt, and the administration felt, that it was important to include that protection. But that is, again, that's right in your wheelhouse, if you would say, where someone's saying, I'm not being offered this because of my source of income.
Thank you. And then final question, because this has come up too from the community. I'm not saying any commissioners, but I think it'll be helpful in the event that someone in the community asks one of the commissioners the same question that I get calls on. Neighbor to neighbor disputes. Okay. And I'm just saying that I don't know why I always get the neighbor to neighbor, no landlord tenant. It's neighbor to neighbor, boundary lines, or whatever the case may be. And they're reaching out and saying, my neighbor is one race and I'm another race, and I think they're discriminating, and they're neighbor to neighbor. And we think the Human Relations Commission should look into this as relates to the legislation at issue. I just wanted you to clarify that for the record, please.
Well, that they are sticky. The neighbor-to-neighbor disputes are some of the worst ones you can run into, and oftentimes what you could find is one neighbor using that as a pretext to get the case in front of you all, because that's one of the prerequisites, right? That it be based on unequal treatment to a protected class. So they have to be viewed very carefully. And Alana, I can't remember if it was you in the last couple months, we had a situation like that where, yeah, it was about a fence or a boundary line or something. And a lot of times that's just something that unfortunately they have to work out themselves, or go to civil court if there's actually a true boundary dispute. So one of the functions the commission performs is sort of this threshold function of looking at all these complaints and trying to figure out which ones truly present an issue that is suitable for you all to rule on, and which ones don't. And that's a very important function. So again, we are always happy to help you with that. But that's, and as I anticipate, as you all are on this commission and some cases go through, the process will be worked out, and everybody will be a lot more comfortable. But again, you're a new commission, so it is you're all are setting the pace for the future commissions. But that's a lot of, those are all things that would be considered by the commission. That this does present an issue that we want to look at, and if it's a close issue, we're always willing to weigh in.
So it looks like we have a number of questions. Mary, you can go next because you had a clarification for Mark. Then Pastor John Watts, you have a question, and then I had a question for a scenario. So Mary?
I can't find the bill number right now, but late last year, one of the bills introduced subsequent to the passing of the bill that created this body and gave us our authority with respect to subpoenas and hearings. An additional bill was introduced to reinsert language that had been the prior description of the Human Relations Commissions about the broader scope of equity areas that the body was to advise on. And because of my particular interest, I'm especially in education, equity was listed among those things, but that list had multiple items on it. It went up, I believe, to a letter F or G or H. So there was an expansion of the scope of advisory responsibility of this body that passed.
Right.
And I believe that was consistent with what Lori mentioned also, that when it comes to the advisory. So where we stand with that, just so that we're clear as a commission, Greg will reach back to the county executive's office to follow up on that point. And we anticipate some type of clarification around that. Pastor John, you have a question?
But Sister Miss Mary kind of went to that because I distinctly remember that that was kind of it was one of the first or second meetings that we had, and I distinctly remember because that hit a sore spot for us.
Mhm.
Restricted only housing.
Mhm.
At that time, it was the other gentleman. I think he was an attorney. I don't remember his name.
Oh, you Roberto
Yeah,
Veloso? Yes. Mhm.
all of that, and I thought that we even voted or something along the lines that they were going to do something, and then we did get back that they were going to change the language to give us more authority in those other areas. And I do distinctly remember that because Mark did make some little fuss over it, brother. And so I do remember the conversation. So this is I'm a little taken that we're only going to be doing fair housing, but I am a little. I wanted to know also about. I think he said the Fair Housing Act on the federal level was broad, but then on a local level it was more stricter. Is that correct? That you said?
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that the Federal Fair Housing Act is fairly broad. Our local act that in our county code is stricter than the federal law because it includes more classes of folks as being protected.
Okay.
So,
Another question. Can you highlight for me on what are the either bullet points? Now, I'm not a attorney, so I don't know any of the language and all that, but can you highlight the bullet points of the Fair Housing Act, how it impacts people of color, like somebody being discriminated, what that, like, you maybe don't have to do that right now, or a document on what that looks like?
Sure.
Just the bullet points and to see. I'm just, I'm always interested to see who are the people at the table to create, and or whether people that supposed to be there to create that law for protection. So, but I just would love to see the bullet point.
Sure. I mean, we can provide that to you. Again, we can provide a summary of the Fair Housing Act and the protected classes under the Fair Housing Act. And we can include in that how our local act is a little different and a little actually broader in because it includes more protected classes. We'll be happy to do that. We'll provide that.
Okay, thank you for that. And just Pastor John and Mary, for just for clarification, you're correct that we initially talked about, and there was some communication back and forth via email about our request to go to the county executive to have that law changed and amended. However, what I'm hearing is that that has not happened. So yes, we did make the request. Yes, it did get up certain to the county executive's office, but it sounds as though it stopped in legal, that nothing has happened with that request as of yet. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on what we've done as a body, and now we've placed in front of Greg an expectation to have the discussion with the county executive and of course respond back to us with where, if anything, can happen. Is that agreeable or understandable?
Well, let me offer a clarification. I think, as I recall, and Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, but after we passed the bill, there was a subsequent bill to expand the advisory functions.
Yeah, I just
not
looked.
the adjudicative, not the hearing functions. I'm sorry.
Right, I initially looked, and the initial bill, the advisory functions were limited to housing. And then there was a subsequent bill 9419 that removed the in-housing from. Yeah, it was, but the actual complaint is still limited to complaints of discrimination in housing.
So the discussion that I will have with the executive is adding those other areas of protection for complaints and hearings. In other words, in the two areas that we had initially looked at were discrimination in public accommodations, and discrimination in employment.
Yes, and that's because those are the areas under state law that the county is allowed to legislate around. So that's why those two are the other two that are out there that could be expanded.
Does anyone else have any questions about that? Are you John, does that help a little bit more? Mary? Mark? Mark,
Yeah.
you're still on mute. Okay, go ahead.
So I guess that so I guess I don't know what I'm trying to ask. So this will have to go back to the county exec to have a discussion to give us broader. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think he probably just needs a reminder because
okay,
he's a lot on his plate. So what I'd anticipate, right, as I said, we had previously drafted this legislation to include those other areas. So I will talk to him and his staff to say, look, we had a meeting with the Human Relations Commission. They were asking about these additional areas. Mark had a discussion with you, Stuart, about doing that, and you seemed it was fine. Can we move forward with that? Now, given the schedule coming up in the next couple months, I'm sure that's going to be an item for the fall. So I would think September or so, just because we have a huge backlog of stuff that the county council has to go through. So, but that's correct. It does have to go. The bill, nothing that's in place now will change. It'll just be added to, and we'll do that with the separate bill that will add those other areas.
Thank you very much. Let's see here. Eugene, you have a question, and then Alana will go to you.
Yeah, I do. So what I'm understanding from this conversation is that we could, from an advisory standpoint, discuss these items that haven't been put into the legislation now. We don't have to wait for the legislation to give us the authority to do that, because we can have advisory, we can make advisory suggestions to the executive and the county council without having public hearings on it. The other thing is I would like to know why employment is not considered, because discrimination in employment both is a problem within county government and the county in general.
Yeah, well, with employment, as I said, we originally included that in the bill, and the decision was made because we were sort of starting from scratch. Let's do housing first, and then we'll consider the other ones once we have our housing program in place. So I don't think there's any opposition to adding employment. I think at the time it was more of a political decision to say, just the housing part of it is a pretty big chunk. Let's get that in place, and then we can supplement it later and add these additional areas. So I agree, it is absolutely important. And I think it will be added. I don't think there's a large opposition to adding it. I think the thought was at the time that addressing all three areas at the same time in one bill would be a huge bill, and they really wanted to push and be successful with the housing part of it first. So I see it coming. As I said, we already had it drafted, so it's probably going to be an item for the fall.
So thank you, Greg. Before we go any too much further, the time is 5:21 and we have a number of other items. So I want to start to curtail the discussion because we can get long-winded. So I'm going to go to Alana, then I'm going to ask my question. Is there anyone else with a pertinent question to the Fair Housing Act? Please just raise your hand. Alana?
No, I was just going to just tap off and just say exactly what Eugene had just commented on, that you as a commission do have the ability to, currently as an advisory entity, to provide, any recommendations. There's the annual report that the commission does to the county executive as well on various discrimination issues in the interim while this issue is going to be, reviewed at the legislative level. So it's that's important to note. And then I agree also, as if with Greg, that my understanding that the county executive is open to those possibilities that we're discussing right now as far as legislation. The only thing from as the EEO director that I have to say, and I would just totally not be, it would be, it's important for me to note that if you or the legislation, or if you as a body want to advocate the inclusion of employment discrimination as a component of your area, that is a whole nother field. And rest assured, you're going to have training. Usually the other counties actually, when, this mandatory, it's mandatory training. It took a lot to get this scheduled, but there is going to have to be, not doubt, mandatory training, because you're impacting another component of people's lives, right? Their jobs, their ability to provide food on the table and a roof over the head. And, we all know that, but I think unless you live this field of investigating discrimination concerns, it becomes very complex, very time consuming. So sometimes be careful what you ask for. But if that is something that the commission is strongly, this current commission and the county executive, if that's what they want to push for, other counties do it, including Prince George's County, I believe, right, Greg and Lori, and I think Howard County as well. So I just want to make sure that people understand. And in some areas, actually, there's a larger staff, because you're then incorporating, I'm just going to put this on the record here, not just one person, Alana, doing the investigation, because you're broadening the scope, right, of what we're talking about. So usually there's a larger staff to conduct these investigations. So, that's just the practicality and reality. And I believe in living in the real world. Right. One person can't do it all.
So thank you for that, because the what I wanted to say there as it relates to employment discrimination, we're not talking about interpersonal disputes. And so as a body, we know that we have the ability to mediate things like neighborhood disputes. Greg and Laura, just so you're aware, as a commission, we have decided to, as it relates to things like that to come before us, we would refer those, and Alana knows that, we refer those through our housing committee to the conflict resolution center, because we know that a lot of those cases in district court will end up over there anyway, and they're trained to actually mediate those cases. I would say the same would be true of housing. We would come up with, of employment, with a process. However, to reemphasize what Alana is saying, the training that is required of us as professionals to process those types of complaints is so detailed. We raise our risks, liability so much more. And so I'd like for us, before we decide that we would delve deeply into that, that we really think strong and deliberately about what that looks like. And if we could really, I don't want us to halfway jump in and tackle something. If we're going to do it, do we have the funds available to support that? Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the process in place to handle that? So be assured that before we decide to take on these types of investigations and processes, we need to be dedicated to the training, have the processes in place, and have the infrastructure and support available. Otherwise, we're doing the citizens, the residents of Anne Arundel County, a huge injustice. And so that was, I'm going to say that about that, and I won't get into asking my questions. John has a question, and then we're going to leave it there. Okay. Hold on, Mark. Well, I'll get right back to you, Mark. John, then Mark. John.
It's fine. I just was a more than a statement, but we can move on.
Okay. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
I don't think many civil rights and other organizations that are active in the area of equal housing are aware of our commission and the authority that it has. And I wondered if there's any prohibition and under county law for us going and making presentations to civil rights organizations as to what our current authority is, and suggest, that we are there as a resource to them.
Well, can I say this? I know that we had talked about this as part of our outreach activity, that each member of this commission would, in his or her capacity, his or her district, would proactively connect with those persons. And absolutely, I think it would be important that the communications committee develop, bullet points, an outreach packet, whether it be a brochure. We started with our website, of course. And so I think that we should probably have a separate discussion about how we want to do that. I know that Eugene has actually gone out a number of times and given presentations about the commission. So now that we know a little bit more, we're trained a little bit better, we're a little more informed, those presentations might be time to start doing those consistently. Of course, with COVID, we obviously can't get out a lot, but I think that's, definitely a discussion point that the committee can have, the outreach committee in conjunction with the communications committee, to talk about developing some type of outreach plan, and then talking points that would help us to make sure we are consistent in what we're saying in our outreach. Does anyone else have any comments or ideas around that?
I just say make sure you have less than a quorum that goes to any particular outreach event.
I'm sorry, did you say that again?
You want to have less than a quorum to go out to any particular outreach
event,
so that it's not a public meeting.
Absolutely. Yeah,
they're two at a time. That's good.
There are only 10 of us, so it won't. I doubt seriously that we'll ever hit the quorum at events like that.
That's good.
Yeah. Mark, is that something that's agreeable to you? Something that you would consider?
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to discuss it right now, but it seems to me that, there are a number of, groups, African American, Hispanic, female, gay, etc., that really don't know our role, and it is relatively new. And I think that we ought to make a point of getting out there so that we do have, we've done what we can do to have cases brought to our attention if they're there.
You're absolutely 100% correct. In especially considering what's happening right now. I was recently on a phone call with Dr. K, and we were discussing the release of people from jail and them being placed in hotels temporarily. So there's transitional housing, so to speak. And the first thing that came to my mind was the conversation that we had in our last meeting with Dan, is it Pontus? About county and housing and so forth. And a lot of what we plan to do did not in any way incorporate or anticipate what's happening with COVID-19. So we probably just need to regroup, because we're at a place and a time in society when we really need to think about people in a different way, because all of us have been impacted by COVID-19, and people who didn't think about being homeless just 2 months ago are now, many of them are facing they're facing homelessness. They're no longer have jobs. And so I think that we need to do this sooner rather than later. So I encourage us to have a subcommittee or a committee meeting soon. So if that's your committee, I would suggest let's move on that very, very quickly and come up with some suggestions around how we can advance letting people know that we're here and we're available. Mary, you had a question, and we're going to have to stop it there because we are not going to be able to get through the rest of the agenda. Mary.
Just strictly for the sake of the minutes,
Mhm.
shall I record this as a direction from you, Georgia, to the Communications Committee and the Outreach Committee to together work on an outreach brochure or talking point?
Yes, ma'am. That sounds.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So at this time, I'd like to thank Greg and I'd like to thank Lori for joining us. This has been really informative, especially the last portion. And just to think we almost forgot that it was on the agenda. But that's on me. But we look forward to having you back with us again. And if there's anything that we can ever do to assist you, please do not hesitate to contact us. We're happy to be of assistance to the county in any way we can. So thank you so very much. If you'd like to exit the call, you're welcome to do that now.
Very nice to meet you all virtually.
Thank you.
Take care.
You.
You too. Yay. Fantastic. So at this time, our guests have exited. And so I'd like to, we have a little less than 30 minutes. I said earlier that what we would do is go back to the minutes. So at this time, we need to, we have more than the March 17th minutes. Is everyone in receipt of the minutes from the previous meeting? I think we have the January 21st minutes. We have the February 28th minutes, and then we also have our March 17th minutes. Is everyone in receipt of those? Okay. Okay. So I will assume that by silence, that's a yes. So if we would, can we go ahead and start with the, Faye, let me ask you a question. What order do we do this in, or would you, how would you advise that we just look at, stay on the agenda and go with the adoption of the March minutes first and then do the other minutes under old business?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So what we'll do at this point is if we can have a motion to accept the minutes from the March meeting. March 17th meeting.
So moved.
I
Okay.
second it.
Okay, all those in favor? Yes?
Yes.
Aye.
Any?
Aye.
Aye, aye. Any abstentions? I mean, objections? None? Okay, the motion passes. So what we're gonna do is the minutes have been adopted. Let's go to committee reports. And what I'd like to do is go ahead and start with the outreach. Eugene?
Yes. I in addition to being part of this committee and being I guess I'm the chair, I have to look back, but I've been the liaison and meeting with the Annapolis Human Relations Commission, and they have made a request to us that we support and endorse their uh, public hearing. They want to have a public hearing or a series of hearings that would address discrimination, um, um, like the one that we held countywide, but also in specific areas. And they want to ask us to support this because they want to expand it to District 6, which includes not just Annapolis, but the rest of the District 6, which is part of the larger Annapolis community. So I told them I would bring this back to the commission. Thought that there would be not a problem with doing. We would get back to them, and that I would of course be in attendance representing the commission at this public hearing or hearings because I'm your representative to the Annapolis Human Relations Commission. So what I need is I need a response from the body to the Annapolis Human Relations Commission of whether we will endorse and support or whether we won't endorse and support.
Can I ask the question, Eugene, when you say endorse or support, what exactly do they want us to do? What are their expectations?
They want us to, their expectation is that we will support their efforts in County Council District 6. They're not asking any, fundamental role. Their Human Relations Commission will handle all the logistics, planning, that kind of stuff.
So they basically want to be able to say that the Anne Arundel County Human Relations Commission support.
Yeah, right.
Okay, gotcha.
Supports their effort in District 6 plus the city of Annapolis.
Okay. Mary, you have a question.
That's a leftover. I will take that down. I'm sorry.
Okay. I apologize.
My bad.
Does anyone have a comment about or a question of Eugene about the request of the Annapolis Human Relations Commission to support their upcoming hearing or public hearings, plural? Okay. Mary, yes.
Sorry about that. My understanding of support often includes promoting, posting it on our Facebook page and possibly on our website, as well as having our names listed on their promotional material. Is that a correct expectation of what support
I would anticipate that's what they would request. They didn't put it in those terms, but I certainly at their next meeting will say that's our understanding if we decide to do it.
Okay. So when you go
if they're having their future meetings via Zoom, or are they just waiting till be able
the last meeting we had was by Zoom, because as you are aware, as a lot of you are aware, the Annapolis City Council passed a resolution that said all their commissions and whatnot could meet by Zoom. So the last meeting we had was a Zoom meeting.
Okay.
So what's the pleasure of the body? Do we want to do this by a motion, or do just, how, Eugene, are you making a motion for us to support?
Support, yeah, I am.
Okay. So Eugene has made a motion that the Anne Arundel County Human Relations Commission support the Annapolis Human Relations Commission in their, to be included in their public hearings or hearings, and to include in Annapolis to include District 6. Call for a second to that motion. Can we have a second? Okay. So we have the motion, we have a second. All those in support of the motion, signify by saying yes.
Aye.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is anyone not in? Do we have anyone opposing the motion? Okay, so the motion passes. Thank you, Eugene. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us in your committee report?
No, that was the extent of it. And I will, Georgia, send CC you on an email and I believe I have Mike Keller, their chairman's email address, and I will construct an email that tells him of what we have decided and send that to him, and then I'll copy you with the response.
Okay, fantastic. Really appreciate that. Okay, so that was our committee report. Is there anyone else with a committee report? Because I didn't receive any communication from anyone after Eugene. Is there anyone else? come back. Okay, seeing no hands raised on that, I'm going to ask that Alana, if you very briefly, if you could give us your Human Relations Officer report.
I will give you a brief update. I'll start out with the good news. The good news is that during this unfortunate pandemic that we're in, the number of hate bias incidents have reduced. So that is the good news.
Fantastic. Yay.
Yeah, I thought so too. We still get some, unfortunately, that the police have to investigate. But they have definitely reduced in comparison to previous prior months. So I wanted to say that, number one. Number two, I wanted to also just bring to the commission's attention that the county actually has, the county government that is, has its first interdepartmental diversity council. And the way that it's structured, they have representatives from various departments throughout the county at differing levels of all backgrounds, diverse in gender, race, color, orientation, religion, what a diversity council should reflect, right? And it's a 2-year commitment that people applied for and were selected. And actually, it's been very meaningful and helpful to many of the employees who have participated. Again, I like the fact and really appreciate the fact that it's of employees at all levels, not just the supervisors, but the person in DPW who's out in the forefront in the community, doing work. So I really like that. One of the subcommittees, and the reason why I'm bringing this up to you guys here today, is that one of the subcommittees is hate bias. And one of the things that they're working on is a 1-page flow chart, so to speak. Something readily accessible, quick, to help employees if they are ever in a situation, whether it be internal employee to employee or external, an employee experiencing a hate bias incident with a member of the community towards one of our employees, what to do. Okay, so just a little flow chart. And I don't know if you can see it, but this is just kind of like a sample. You can't read it, but just wanted to show you how it looks. But with that said, it prompted in my discussion with Major Goodwin, who came as a guest speaker a few months ago before the commission, whether the police has an external community flow chart, like a 1-pager. And it's my understanding that there is not one currently. And I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the commission. Not trying to put anything on the commission's full plate table, but they seem to like the idea of having that. And that's something to be posted on Mark's communication Facebook page or, something of that nature. But it would have to be the hate bias subcommittee if they are willing. And I'm just putting it out there. No decision needs to be made today, but just trying to say that there are things that may sound simplistic, like a 1-page general resource for somebody to look to or be posted on the commission's website or Facebook page that can really help folks. So in the community at large, what to do. If you're, what it's like a quick definition. What is a hate bias? What to do if you're in a situation? Common sense, you would think, is call 911, but sometimes people don't know where to go, and the resources that are available. So that was the other thing. And then the other aspect of just my quick report, and I'm about to wrap it up for everyone because I know it's been a long meeting, is just the good news that you all already know about as far as the legislation that you can look online, passed as relates to the Richard Collins law. And actually there's some new training as well, legislation that was passed requiring law enforcement police sworn officers to have hate bias training, not only in the beginning of, their career as sworn officers, but every 3 years. And that was something that had also recently passed as well. I just wanted to bring that out. And I think there was another, so let me just give you the real quick verse. So that's Senate Bill 606, which is the Richard Collins law. And then I wanted to also bring to your attention so that you can look at your leisure if you want to read the details of the law, not for this meeting because it will take a little bit longer, right? Senator Alfred's and Delegate Chang's law that was passed. Alfred's was Senate Bill 161, as far as prohibiting a person from placing or inscribing an item or symbol, including an actual or depicted noose or swastika, whether temporary or permanent, on any real or personal property, public or private. But again, I encourage people in their own time to look up the law because there's a whole penalty of imprisonment not to exceed 3 years, but there's a punch as far as a fine not to exceed 5,000, but at least it's something versus nothing. And then there was one other one that I am looking. Oh, and I think I told you the police training legislation was Senate Bill 633, but if I didn't, I just did just now. And there was one other legislation that for some reason is escaping me in the moment, but I'll get it to you all by the next meeting. Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
I apologize. I ended up having to handle something. Eugene, clearly you didn't get my message, did you?
You said to unmute. I unmuted.
Okay. Well, I asked if you could handle it for me, but anyway, I'm back. Thank you, Alana. No, that's okay. Thank you, Alana. And so if anybody would like more information about those bills, and I think it's really important that we read them for ourselves. Alana, is there any way that you can, that it's okay for you to send us links to those so that we can see them?
Yes, I'll send the links.
Okay, fantastic.
Mary might want to put it on the minutes or something.
Yes, and that's
I can pick them up too. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we'll have them in our minutes. Let's see here. So now that we are to our old business, let's adjust real quickly because as I said earlier, we have 2 sets of minutes that needed to be we need to formally adopt. And we can start with Faye, do we start with the oldest in February? What do you recommend?
That's fine. I don't think it really makes a difference, but that's fine.
Okay, so everyone should have received a copy, and please let me know if you have not, a copy of the February 18 minutes. And if you have not received a copy, please raise your hand. And you can physically raise your hand also. Okay, so at this point, it looks like everyone has, and you've had an opportunity to read that. I need a motion to adopt these minutes in a second.
I move for adoption of the minutes of the February 18th meeting.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, yes?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any objections? Okay, seeing none, the minutes have been adopted. And this same now would be true of the January 21st minutes. Are there any corrections to these minutes? If you had an opportunity to read them.
The January 21st meeting minutes incorporate corrections that were requested.
Okay, fantastic. So let's just move to adopt them. So we have a motion to adopt the minutes.
So moved.
Okay, second.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Okay, hearing none, that's passed as well. Thank you, Mary, so much for getting that. All of these, Mary, if you would make sure that Mark receives all corrected copies, and Mark, if you would make sure that the county has these uploaded to the website, that would be fantastic. I really appreciate it. I think we kind of have worked through our process now of making sure that we get information from Mary to Mark and then up to the county for the county's website. So thank you all for that. On to the next steps, the dialogue against bigotry. Alana, do you have any information on the next steps for that?
Okay, so just to reference that, because of the pandemic, clearly that's on hold and was on hold.
Okay.
The
Okay.
crisis. That's number one. Number two, I did speak with the county executive and the county executive leadership, and they all were very positive and supportive of the idea. The county executive indicated, because of his commitment to youth, that he thought it would be good to have a video, can you see me, the real me dialogues, basically, with members of the youth, high school students, for example, speaking their brief story. So that was something that he actually was personally committed and basically was in support of. But at the present time, because of the pandemic, I don't think that is going to happen, maybe the fall.
Yeah, I know. I remember, I briefly recall, Mark, and you can clarify this for us, that we kind of started off in that because we took the photographs and things like that. I created a video. There was some back and forth between you and the folks at Arundel TV and the public information officer for the county. So can you kind of reconnect that for us? Not necessarily right now, but let's see, where that stands and when we could anticipate moving forward on that.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking me. Can you give me a quick
Yeah,
synopsis?
if you can basically kind of reconnect with the public information officer. What is her name, Alana?
Roz Hamlin.
Roz Hamlin, and see where we are on the video. Do you recall the video conversation?
No, what video?
Okay.
She's aware of it. It's the conversation about, can you see me, the real me, and basically having people from various diverse backgrounds saying, I am Anne Arundel, showing the commitment from the community at large and the county executive to be a diverse and inclusive community. It was kind of one of those creative efforts to counter hate bias incidents. And that's something that Roz is aware of as well. But I know that with the schools also being out, it's going to be from the youth perspective, or that may be the challenge. And that's why I was just thinking in my mind that the fall may be a better time to follow up.
Right. So it may be something that we table, but I do want us to go back and kind of research it because it fell off the table. So Mark, if you want to just have a separate conversation, you and I can reconnect you with those old emails and we can kind of construct where we left things because it literally fell off the cliff.
Okay. Yeah, I would appreciate that because I'm
drawing a blank on it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. Second piece of old business, and I don't want us to not get into, because we definitely need to talk about the upcoming meetings. Inviting Carl Snowden and Dr. Dan Taft to our next meeting, countywide survey racial attitudes. Where do we stand on that? What's the pleasure of the commission?
Well, I think I was involved in proposing it, so I still think it's a good idea. And it was delayed because of talking to the people from the law office this time. So I would propose that we do it for the next meeting, and like that.
And Georgia, if I may, please, one of the other speakers that was supposed to be on schedule at the last meeting, but with the cancellation and whatnot, was the ethics director from the county to answer commissioners' conflict of interest or ethics questions.
Oh, yeah.
That's mandatory. So
that has to do with our training. So our training, and we'll talk about this because Faye actually had a question earlier, and we kind of talked through something in a sidebar. And what that is that as a body, we have a lot of training to get through and how we're going to prioritize that. So absolutely, Mike is up on the list, the highest on that, because at this point, let me say this, who has not completed their ethics training? Is there anyone, and you can raise your hand on the reaction piece. Is there anyone who has not completed their ethics training? Okay. So If you have not completed your ethics training, what I'm going to say to you is please, please, please do that before our next meeting, because it does have an implication on how we are functioning as a body. Okay. And so I would advise you to do that, number one. And then secondly, that training really should have happened a long time ago, but it hasn't, and we all know why it hasn't happened. So no need to go back down that road. So at our next meeting for our training, we will have to have ethics training. How much time that's going to take, I don't know. But Mark has proposed that we go back to a piece of old business and invite Carl Snowden and Dr. Dan Nataf to attend the upcoming meeting. Okay. And so as a body, we're all in agreement with that. Our next agenda would include those two parties, training with the Ethics Commission and Carl Snowden to talk about the survey. Okay.
Do we need to do that as a motion?
I don't think so, because that was old business. Yeah.
All right, we had already discussed that.
Yeah, it was old business, and the reason that it fell off was obviously because we were closing down. So I don't think, Faye, in your opinion, does that require a motion?
No, because we'd already discussed that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So, Mark, if you would do us a favor, I think before you were the person that was in contact with Carl and with Dr. Nataf. If you would let them know that we will invite them to our next meeting. Now, the question is, when is our next meeting going to be? We have June on the agenda. I don't recall, and so we're all going to have to put our heads together on this. What we discussed as far as the summer is concerned, are we going to take a break in June and come back in August? Or are we going to continue in June and reconvene in September? What is the desire of the commission?
I thought that we had agreed to take off July and August, but I could be mistaken.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the January minutes real quickly to see, because I thought we were taking July off as well, but I could be mistaken, and maybe it was before, maybe it was in our December meeting. Mary, could you do us a huge favor and research this for us?
Absolutely.
But it sounds like, does anyone have an objection then to meeting in June? Okay, hearing no voices, I assume that we don't have any objections to meeting in June. So if we meet in June, that means date-wise, what does that look like? That would be the third Wednesday of the month, is that correct? Or is the second, I'm sorry, we're off a little bit because we're meeting on an odd day. Now let me say this too, whenever we do meet, before we were meeting on a specific date in the month, because we're doing these meetings via Arundel TV, we're somewhat have to work with their schedule when they're available for us to do this because they're recording it. So we were supposed to meet on the 19th, which is the third Tuesday of the month. What that would mean for us in the month of June would be the 16th. So do we want to target June the 16th?
Do you want me, Georgia, to check with the Arundel TV and then send an email to you just for as far as their available dates? I'm just asking.
Yes, I think that we should target for around that time. That's the third week in June. Mm-hmm. Is that agreeable to everyone? Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any objections to that? Okay. Seeing that there are no objections, what's going to happen is Alana is going to reach out to Arundel TV to make sure that we can meet the week of June the 16th, preferably the 16th. Is this time from 4 to 6 okay with everyone?
No, it's problematic for me because of work.
Okay, okay. So you would prefer to meet at 6 o'clock?
Yes, that would work better for me.
Okay. Is that a problem for anyone else?
Yes.
I request that it a challenge for me on Mondays and Wednesdays,
Yeah.
particularly Wednesday being the Board of Education meeting.
Okay, we'll try to, well, I think that that's going to be an issue for us anyway. We probably won't get Wednesday because the board, Arundel TV is managing that, if I'm not mistaken. Well, so that's part of the problem, is that we're competing with all of the other county agencies and organizations that are using them.
And my recollection, Georgia, if I may help, I think also Tuesday night sometimes poses a problem, especially if we are still in this realm of pandemic. Tuesday night is a night that there are a lot of other meetings scheduled. I'll try my best. It may end up being Thursday again. I'm just saying.
Let me add this to this also. The time is an issue. So I realize that the 6 o'clock is preferable for your schedule. The reason that we ended up going earlier this time was this was the slot that Arundel TV had available. So we're not only trying to be flexible as far as the date, but also the time. But we would prefer, if we can, Alana, to go later rather than earlier, if they can accommodate us. Okay.
Yeah, I can try to make it work. I mean, don't make changes because of me. I'll try to work around whatever schedule.
Okay. Well, I will pay close attention to that and make sure that we communicate early. And this is why it's important that we draft our agenda, that we select our date, and we get everything posted. The earlier that we can do that, the more of us that can make arrangements. It is 6:03. Are there any announcements?
There's a quick question. I have one.
Okay, I'm going to start with Eugene. Eugene, you have an announcement?
Yeah, I've been working with some folks in the community, and we had some success getting a letter from the Black Caucus written to the governor, because the governor just recently said he was going to test folks in correctional facilities. The letter outlines the reasons why you should do that, ask for a timeline, ask for transparency in terms of inspections, prioritization, and the rest of it. So I will forward that letter to you, Georgia, and then you can share it with the committee.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was really hopeful that Dr. K was going to be on the call and you were going to be able to bring that up at that time, so we can have more robust discussion around that at that time. Someone else, Mary, you had an announcement?
It's not an announcement. Did we go over new business?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize. I just skipped right over that. Any new business?
I would like to raise something. I do not know if this body wants to engage or not with County Bill 1220, the one about workforce housing. It is receiving a lot of support from the advocacy community. We know ACT is strongly behind it. I have not looked at it personally. I know NAACP hopes to look at it because I'm involved with them on that. I suggest that some bodies need to take an equity lens to it as well as a public housing lens. And so I'm asking this body if we want to engage and provide any opinion on that legislation.
I think before we do that, what I would do is, who is the chair of the housing committee?
Tony Strong Pratt.
Okay. Well, two things. I think we should read it first before we jump into the pond too deeply, and have some type of discussion around what it looks like and what you're asking us to do as a result of the bill. So do you have a recommendation beyond us being actively engaged with the bill? What exactly would you like for us to do as a commission?
Consider whether or not we want to provide either testimony, written or spoken testimony on this bill before the county council. I do not know when it's up for hearing. I believe it's early June, so we don't have much time. It's before our next meeting.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to put this in front of the committee first versus just the whole group. But since we don't have a lot of time, oh God, why don't you circulate it to everyone? I would ask that you would do that, request that we all read it, and then I can ask questions of the committee. If anyone has questions, we can kind of create a form around that and make a recommendation. Okay. All right.
I had a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Is the Arundel TV airing of this, does it happen live or does it happen in?
It's recorded. It'll be recorded. Mm-hmm.
I know, but then when is it aired?
I don't know. We can ask that question. Alana, can you find out from?
I think it's live.
Excuse me?
I just checked on my phone. It's live.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had to mute that individual. If you have a television or something on in the background, please keep your phone muted. You said that you believe that it's live, Mark?
No, I didn't say that. I don't know.
Oh,
I believe that was one of the commissioners. Yeah, Tosin said that.
Tosin said he believed it was live.
okay.
He just checked it on his phone.
Okay, I thought that it was recorded. Oh well, we're live, y'all. Okay, just seeing all our mistakes live. They said we're human too. Okay, is there any new business?
Yes, I have something. I'm sorry.
Hey, go ahead.
As far as the training, may I suggest that you, Alana, Khalid, and I just get together and look at the training priorities and come back to the next meeting with a recommendation?
Yes.
Wait, well, let me just say, we can, yes, of course. However, the mandatory ethics has been on the table for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's rescheduled.
No, we're not talking about the ethics training.
Okay.
Yeah,
this
is
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly, I'm in agreement with that. Actually, you and I, Faye, were in email
Right.
about today, and we had an earlier previous discussion
Right.
On the phone saying just that. So, I mean, yes, that's what we discussed about.
Right. So, Faye, if you want to circulate an email to the group that you just mentioned and find out what time would be most agreeable to everyone, then of course we can discuss those items that are still on the plate and when and how to prioritize those, especially considering that we're going to be probably out in July and August. It's a good time for us to use that to plan. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Thank you so much for the suggestion. And any other new business other than training? Okay. There being none. Let's see here. We were at announcements. Any additional announcements? Okay. Being none. Just as a reminder, Alana will follow up with us concerning our next meeting in June, the week of June 16th. We will post the agenda, the minutes to both our website, county website, as well as our Facebook page. We'll post the announcement there. Thank you all for joining us in this virtual meeting. This meeting is adjourned at 6:10 p.m. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.